Hey everybody, David Ellefson here. This is John the Ninja Podcast. Check it out. We are rocking, and so should you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's John the Ninja live in the dojo, and I am so thankful that I'm able to give an opportunity to open the door and invite the ambassador in, Pastor Dave. Now, you guys are wondering who I'm talking about off the jump, but let me tell you, this individual is a Grammy-winning artist with over 40 years in the music business. He's pivotal in helping bands like Slipknot, Nickelback, Dollskin, and even Post Malone for my rock fans that love a little bit of hip-hop. But his motto is be prepared, be agreeable, and say yes, because you never know what the opportunities are going to come along and you need to be ready. This man's name is Dave Ellefson. He's honed his chops from every single standpoint you can think of. He started off his music career when his parents had him start on piano and saxophone, but after, like many of us, seeing Gene Simmons with a bass on a picture, said, you know what, that's what I want to do. I want to play bass. Now, he is an accomplished guitarist, but with everything he's done, he has made his name being a staple and rhythm section of the Megadeth band. Now, you all know Megadeth. Their music has been ringing out for the years, but his influence goes way beyond that. Not only working with Megadeth, but working with Peavy and having an assortment of his own business ventures. He has a music group. He has a book line. Oh my God, guys, I'm telling you, his coffee line too, Ellefson Coffee Co. is going to blow your mind. But with all the bands, he's currently going back and forth with the Lucid, Diet, one of my personal favorites, Altitudes and Attitude. Man, the one we're talking about today is going to be the Kings of Thrash. After a feeling in 2021 that the album Killing Is My Business needed to be played live and back to the grassroots, he linked up with Jeff Young and now currently Chaz Leon on vocals and Fred Aiken on drums and the legendary Megadeth guitarist Chris Poland. They are going on tour this month, and they're going to be coming back to one of my favorite venues, the Ardmore Music Hall, March 7th, and promoting their live album at the Whiskey A Go Go, Kings of Thrash, Best in the West. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to invite Dave Ellefson.
What's happening? Nice dojo. Glad to be there. How are you?
Hey, okay, man. You're looking great. Your hair's fabulous. You said it was a beautiful day in
Thank you.
AC. Man, I had a whole plan to start this interview, but you literally a couple minutes ago just dropped the news that the Kings of Thrash have their own coffee now, a limited edition coffee. So the Best of the West. I want to know what type of roast is it, and more importantly, we know how the company got started for coffee, but we never really hear how you dove into liking coffee before you started that business venture. So how did you get both going?
So yes, you're right. The Coffee Best of the West, which is also the name of our new double live CD and DVD that's coming out on March 24th. And as you mentioned, tour. It's kind of funny. We're touring in advance of a live album. Usually, you tour, to set up a studio album, but this one we're actually touring to set up and promote a live album that we recorded at the Whiskey A Go Go back in October, and it's called the Best of the West. So thought it'd be a good name for a coffee, the Best of the West. So and as far as how it's funny. The first time I drank coffee, my mom and dad would drink coffee. I grew up on a farm, so they'd always have coffee in the morning. I hated it. I hated the taste of it. Kind of like beer. And then I acquired a taste for both at one point. So, but, I just remember the first time I drank coffee, all it did is it just made me pee, So I was like, why wouldn't we drink this? And then I guess probably in my 20s when I moved out to Los Angeles, as we were starting Megadeth, I was running a rehearsal studio called Mars Studio. And we used to rehearse there a lot. And it's when Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland came into the band. And I remember always going to McDonald's and driving through and getting coffee. And I always liked it with honey. That was always my sweetener. And then I, started to use cream and various things in it. But that was kind of my start of it. And I guess I just kind of kept it going, Eventually I put the beer down. By age 25, I cashed out. I was done with that and led a sober life since. And so coffee's just kind of been a nice companion to my new lifestyle. And we started the coffee company, Ellefson Coffee Co. We started it back, I think, around 2016, 2017, something like that. So, we roasted for other groups. We did some license deals and things like that. And now I like that we just have our 3 roasts that we do. Well, 4 now that we've added Kings of Thrash in there. So, kind of a light, medium, dark. And the Kings of Thrash is basically a roast and peace flavor profile.
And I do want to say, thinking back to the history that you've had coming from Minnesota, and I do love the story of where your dad and mom were so supportive. Your mom came out one time wearing a Megadeth shirt. Your dad always gave you guys the time of day, let you have your own little space. I do remember the story when you ate, I think it was the steak. Your dad came home wanting a steak, and you already gave it to everybody else. But reminiscing about, times of old and then coming back to play these songs, you kind of want to bring it to what it was like in the club days. Now that you actually have the comfortability, thinking about how Killing Is My Business was initially recorded, those songs were written slower than anticipated. So I was wondering, when you guys were saying, hey, let's play these songs, let's go out and tour them, did you bring the idea up of saying, hey, you know what, let's play some of these a different way than the album? Or are you just sticking to, like, no, we're going to give them the Maiden effect, like when they did Somewhere Back in Time? This is your opportunity to see what it was like.
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I think we rip these songs apart to really dig into the nuances of them, because I think at the tempos they were recorded at, some of the nuance got lost. I mean, it certainly gained in ferociousness and just the complete, anger of it and everything. Like even yesterday, I was just running over some of the stuff from So Far So Good So What, and even Set the World Afire. These tempos, they're pushed right to the edge of where they can be played. And I think back to the time, to 1987 in this case, when we recorded So Far So Good So what was going on around us, where Megadeth fit into that landscape, and the statement that we were making. So that the tempos were part of that, and live we played them to tempo for sure. But I think it's interesting. Jeff and I talked about having Fred and Chaz now in the band, because they're a whole generation behind us, in their 30s. So they, Chaz actually has a Megadeth tribute band called Woke Up Dead. And so he's just thrilled that he's actually getting to actually really play the songs with a couple guys from Megadeth, and so he's, such a great spirit. And Fred is just a monster drummer. I mean, incredible. And I always go back to the one song that I really love playing with him is Skull Beneath the Skin off Killing Is My Business, because it's a song I always loved the riffs, but as we sped the riffs up, and as the album was recorded, it was a lot harder to play them at that tempo. And the way Fred has a nice backbeat pocket to how he plays, similar to how Chuck Beeler did on So Far So Good So What, and also similar to how Sean Drover did through who was the drummer during the 2000s and 2010, those several years there when I went back to Megadeth. So it's fun when you've got a drummer that can really play at tempo, conviction, and the ferociousness of what the groove is, but yet be able to lay it back into a pocket. That's a really it's pretty special and specified way of playing, and he has it. So every time we play it, I just love it, especially the riff at the end, because it's got this really syncopated upstroke on the riffs, on the notes in that riff on the outro, and it's fun to play. It's just one of those that it's just you like, your lips and all, you're like, so it's cool to have that feeling in the band.
And it's really awesome to see the passion everybody has for it. For Fred and Chaz, I can understand when, we're listening to these albums, we want to emulate it exactly, note for note, and everything that's happening. Jeff, he still has tapes from solos from Megadeth back in the day. One thing I really liked that I wanted to point out is the VIP treatment you guys mentioned. You said, hey, if you're coming, bring all your stuff, come through. We're going to chit chat in the back. It's not going to be a super expensive one picture and you're gone moment. You are allowing people not only to get autographs of certain things, but you're also selling basses. So I was wondering how that configuration is going. Do you play the basses for the show and then give them, or these are just basses you have from your stock and then you're giving it to them?
No, I bought these specifically to stage play and sell for this tour, because, I auditioned a few basses. I've got, I think, 16 different models now with Jackson guitars, in various colors, 4-string, 5-string, all the different body shapes and everything. So I brought a few of them when we first did our shows back in October. And when we had sound checked at the very first show, Brick by Brick in San Diego. I was trying a few basses out, and Chris Poland just looks up. He goes, "Dude, that's the bass right there. That's the one." And it was the silver 4-string, which is great because both of these albums are 4-string records. They don't have any 5-string stuff to them. I didn't get into the 5-string stuff until Rust in Peace. And then into the 90s, I kind of moved over to, playing a 5-string. So there's a real authenticity about it. And that 30th anniversary Jackson 4-string, the Quicksilver one, is the replica of the very first one that I had, that Jackson Guitars made for me back in 1987, which I recorded the So Far So Good So What record with. So that bass is specifically designed for that type of music, fast, thrashy, tight, really tight low end to it, and with a nice crisp snap to it. So that bass works well with that. I'm bringing out a couple of Kelly Birds, and I'll have a couple of 5-strings with me as well. The same with the 30th anniversary, which is the reissue of the one that I had made so I could play Hangar 18 on tour, quite honestly. So I have a few of those out, but for the most part, it's the 4-string. It's that Quicksilver 4-string that's the featured one.
And just thinking of the influence the band and the playing that you've had, Dimebag Darrell, that story where he really sat you down and said, "Listen, man, the music really changed my life." One great story, I mentioned his name, Post Malone. He's got a tattoo, So Far So What?
Right, yeah.
It's one of those things where you do have certain people coming out on tour when, like, say, okay, when Chris can make it, Mr. Poland, come through, you're going to play with us. You got some of your buddies from Taw's. And I was wondering, considering so many people in the music industry have been influenced, was there anybody you reached out to who's like, "Hey, you know what, for this date, this would be really cool if we could get him here because during the Killing Is My Business tour, you were here," or Kerry King, what you doing? Did you reach out to anybody else for like a surprise guest appearance or just to even come hang out and watch you guys?
I have reached out to a few people. In fact, there's, my friend Greg Handovit, who moved to LA with me. We were high school buddies and had bands growing up, and he and I and Dave, we started Megadeth together, and so he's going to be joining us in Minneapolis. And actually, Chuck Beeler, it looks like, is probably going to come out in Flint, Michigan. And I've hit a couple of other people along the way, and which is pretty cool. First of all, I kind of reach into the legacy of Megadeth. It's like, hey guys, like, dust off your chops, let's go, let's jam some tunes, let's have fun, because we've talked about playing these records for so many years, and it's like, hey, I'm doing it, get out here, like, invite all your friends to the party. It's kind of one of those things. And as far as there's a couple of other people along the way that I've reached out to, and we'll just kind of see how it goes. One of them, I'm waiting for him to hit me back. So I hope, I don't know if his phone number still works or not. So, but yeah, that was a big part of this, was, not to just every night make it an all-star thing, but to the people that were close to this, they grew up with this, that were part of it, to have them come back and be a part of this with us. To me, that's what makes it, that's what makes it the cool, special presentation on this.
Just to mention Greg, not only Greg, Chaz too. Man, you just got friends that are lawyers all over the place, man. I'm like, it might be good for me because I'm applying to schools now for that. But I'm also like, man, what would you have done if you didn't do Megadeth? But that's just the universe, God be allowing you to, hey, this is what I got you on. But you were smart enough to know that's what you needed to do. For Chaz and Fred, this is a monumental opportunity. They've really come in and then made a statement being able to play with you guys. There's a term that Chris Adler made that says "My Megadeth." And you guys use that for making the Dystopia record. For this tour, were there any moments where you guys ran into that? It's like, hey, do you guys have any recollections from this time period that you want to throw into a song or a feel? Was there any conversation for how the tour would be presented, and then also the playing for the live show before you guys went on for the Whiskey a Go-Go?
One of the things that I thought about, that's a good question, by the way. Me and Jeff, of course, have got tons of stories that come up And, funny, tragic or otherwise, that from just our, year and a half that we spent together, maybe not even that long actually, while we were on the road together and stuff. But, one of the things that I wanted to do was I really was hoping to see if there was any venues that were still available that we played on the Killing Is My Business tour. And unfortunately, the only one that's still around is the Metro in Chicago. And we chose instead to play the Forge in Joliet to kick off the tour, which I think is the right play for the commencement of the tour. But I don't think any of the other venues are still around. And then of course was So Far So Good So What. Same thing. Most of those are gone. That's why it was kind of interesting when we played at the Whiskey back in October, because Megadeth didn't play any of the clubs on the Sunset Strip. It was a very different day. It was a whole different genre of music. Let's just call it hair metal for lack of better description. We played in very different clubs and venues around LA. So, for us to have such a great, not only just a great show and a performance, but the audience participation and all the stage diving and the mosh pits that were going on, that stuff was generally not allowed at the Whiskey. In fact, there were big signs that said no stage diving, as kids would stage dive right past the sign, which is true, rebellious thrash metal fashion, So I loved it. I thought it was so cool. And I'm just so glad we got that on audio and we got that on DVD, because I think it's something that's going to really be a lot of fun for the fans to watch.
It's like the Kiss tour when they released the first live album. You guys are taking a little bit of that, but a little bit backwards, since you are touring to promote the live album. But you guys also have new tunes that you've yet to release. You're in the working of new material. How many of those new tunes are you guys actually going to test on this tour cycle? Or is this just straight, hey, you know what, this is going to be the Remembrance tour, we're going to do this first, and then we'll come back to the new stuff later?
We just played in Atlanta a week and a half ago at the Days of the Dead horror convention, and we pulled out I Ain't Superstitious, which was kind of our memoriam to Jeff Beck, because the version that we put on Peace Sells was really, we took it from his version and then we, Megadethized it from there. Chris Poland is, such a, I mean, he's not Jeff Beck, but he's got this thing about him. I mean, he's Chris Poland all the way, but there's just a fluid sound that just plays back to his love of Jeff Beck's guitar playing. So we brought that into the set. We also broke out Train of Consequences, which is a song that has been asked for again for a long time. And although it's not, and this was kind of a one-off show, so we didn't play both albums in their entirety, but we thought, let's add some more songs to the set. Let's kind of change this up a little bit. So, there's some deep cuts that have been asked for, and I figure, we're the perfect candidates to do it. So on the tour, we are going to kind of toy around with a few some other songs for encores and things like that. It's, again, the focus is the Killing and So Far So Good So What records, but there's one song in particular, this brand new song that it's Jeff's song, really. I mean, he and I put it together. We collaborated on it, but it was this riff that he had, a couple of riffs that he had from back in 1988. Had he stayed in the band, I guess they would have ultimately become Rust in Peace. But so that's where we started. And one thing I'll say about Jeff, man, is he's a great motivator. I mean, he really gets keyed in on stuff. He gets focused. And he really has been driving the bus big time on this. This is not just me by any means. This is, he and the guys rehearse over in LA all the time. I'm going over there this week as well, for some more tour rehearsal, plus to work on some of the new material. So, it's always, you kind of just, again, you say yes, and you just kind of keep working at all of it. And, one thing about being on tour is when you're on the bus and you're rolling and you're doing gigs, and sometimes you walk off stage and you go, man, that was a freaking cool moment that just happened right there. Let's develop that, right? Like, let's open that up for some crowd participation, or, man, let's let you take that solo like you did tonight, So this is the kind of band that isn't just locked into doing things one way, I want everybody, and we have so far, let everybody really be part of the fabric, let's really, let this thing develop and let it grow kind of a mind of its own with the four of us together.
And something that I really do want to point out is how you're able to just be in all these projects and you're still considered the ambassador. You're still the guy that's keeping the glue together for everything. But something you mentioned that I really found interesting was you always seem to be the guy that is being the cheerleader. Whether it was the early days of Megadeth or helping out the other bands, or especially when you joined Pevy. And, somebody that I didn't really know of until it was mentioned into your book was Tom Hazard. I believe I said his name right. But he seems to be that guy. It's like you just said for Jeff. He's pushing the brand of David along, man. He's helping you with all these ventures. You guys are good friends. And I wanted to know, how do you think he has his place in your life? How are you benefiting him as much as he's benefited you? You have these friendships where either A, you just click with the person. Spiritually, you guys like the same stuff. And then you have other relationships where you guys meet, but you have a common cause. And because of the time and the struggles that you've gone through, that builds the friendship. So even if you guys are on two different playing fields, you're still family. So, what is that symbiosis between you two that you guys have? And how do you feel like you benefit him just as he's benefited you with all these business ventures?
I always say always for a reason and sometimes only for a season, right? And, you meet people, synergies happen. We did a lot of great business things together. We've kind of since moved on from all of that. And now, as I got, my label up and running, as we got the coffee company started, and those things are now up and running and, and sustaining themselves. Really now at this point, I'm more back to just really digging into not just playing music, but writing, doing a ton of writing and playing. And that's why I have all these records that have come out. I took a season, especially in, during the pandemic, 2020, 2021, I really dug deep and really used that time off the road to be constructive with composing. And it allowed me to tell some stories through the songs. When I'm traveling, I usually get, that's kind of the inspiration for ideas. Sometimes you need to just stay put for a minute, whether it's in a studio or at home or whatever, to just kind of put them together so that you can sort of, make sense of them and because again, songwriting is storytelling. So the Ellefson Soto record that I did, Jeff Scott Soto, then he and I and our guitar player Andy Martingelli, we really had a great friendship and partnership that started with that, and I think that's going to continue for more of that. The Lucid stuff, of course, happened. So Drew and I knew Drew a little bit through the label work and things like that, but then he and I, he just sent me a song one day, and that started a whole new musical friendship. And then as Jeff and I reconnected through in early 2021 around making the documentary film for Nick Menza, and then he and I reconnected. So all these things, it's they ebb and they flow. You know what I mean? Sometimes you're full on in something, and then that kind of hits the brake, and over here you're hitting the gas, and this one's taken off. And I think at this point, look, I was lucky enough to have a pathway, through Megadeth and everything for so many years that that will always be there, right? And obviously that's why we're celebrating that with Kings of Thrash. But I think now also to be entrepreneurial with business, to also explore music with other artists and other musicians. To me, that's the stuff that gets me excited now, is that it doesn't just have to be this one thing forever and for always, that you can put different lines in the water and see what kind of fish you're going to catch. The variety is what makes life fun now at this point.
and being that you have so many friends in the industry and you command so much respect, you know, a lot of people do know now, especially that you were in seminary, and then what happened with that while you were touring, and it was like, am I gonna make, is it the make or break? Am I gonna be a pastor or am I gonna be a rock star? And at that time, I feel like you had the fortitude to acknowledge, like, I think God wants me to do the music. You know, when it came to that decision, you know, how does God speak to you on that line? Because a lot of people have different things they believe, you know, that voice in their head, you know, they get a feeling, they get signs, etc. You know, when
Right.
it came to that, like, how did you know, like, you know what, let me pursue this with the music more and we'll see what happens? And even now, like, I would have thought the pandemic would have been the best time to finish up seminary. So where are you on that front, and where were you at the time to know, like, no, music is the calling, this is the road?
It's funny. My mom was pissed when I dropped out of seminary. She said, she even said, she goes, Megadeth is holding you back. You know, you should have continued that. You know, maybe I should listen to mom. Who knows? You know, but you know, the funny thing is it was something I did really. Being on the road, there can be a lot of downtime. You know, there really can. And I remember in 1998, um, going to the University of Phoenix, which was a pretty popular online school at that time, and kind of set the tone for how to do online education. So I did some studies, and we were traveling. I was on the Cryptic Writings tour. I remember traveling to Japan, going to South America, and, you know, these long, you know, 12, 14-hour flights, reading books and doing things. And I really liked it. So during the season in the 2000s, when I wasn't performing with Megadeth anymore at that time, I went to school and I finished my degree, and I did it all online. Um, so that really was a pretty cool accomplishment, you know, just to have a, you know, to get a business degree. I kind of felt like people that were around me in business at that time, I was doing artist relations for PD, and everybody that got those jobs all had business degrees, and I didn't. So I kind of felt like, you know, I sort of got lucky on that one, you know, and it's like, you know, you got one hall pass, don't take it for granted, you know. And I talked to some other friends of mine from Fender, who were performers who would come off the road being sidemen and things like that, and they had sort of hung their guitars up, you know, as a profession, and took the business gig. And I knew I wasn't going to go that route. I knew my professional playing days were not over. But it did pique my interest at that age, I guess, to go, you know, let me go pay attention to this right now, you know, and do this. You know, most people go to college right after high school and kind of get their education done. I did not do that. I went up to Hollywood and we started Megadeth and, you know, did that. So, you know, so then as the seminary thing came up, because I was doing, you know, worship leading and stuff like that. And again, it was just, I kind of looked at it like it was just kind of another musical gig, you know, to do. And this is before I came back to Megadeth. And, you know, the path to being an ordained minister and all this stuff, it was, you know, it was at least a 2-year path, with the goal being that it had to be a 4-year path. And, you know, that's when I just went, yeah, this is not my path. You know, it's cool. And I learned a lot. I mean, it was kind of cool because, you know, the Bible's a 2-inch thick book, and it had a lot of, you know, it was a pretty thick narrative. Now I understand the narrative, you know, of what it is, you know, the Old Testament, New Testament stuff. And I grew up a Lutheran kid, so I knew little bits and pieces of it, but now I know the thread of it. And, you know, it's, you know, so that's really all it is, to be honest with you, you know. And, you know, so I kind of, people go, oh, Pastor Dave, I never became a pastor. I never became an ordained pastor, because that was a whole other thing. Now it's funny, I did get the little $100 card that me and Paul McCartney and you know, some other famous actors have, that you can get from the Universal Life Church, you know, which gives you the license so you can, you know, do weddings and funerals. As I say, you can marry them and bury them, you know. So I've done that, and I've actually officiated a few weddings for some friends, which is just kind of for fun, you know, more than anything. But anybody can buy that card, so it's not that special, to be honest with you.
You know, being able to dive into whatever religion you cater to, you know, I learned a lot in my studies because I went to school for biblical studies. But there's moments where certain things click, other things you're like, no way, etc. So it is fun. You know, just a side question before we continue. I remember your mom wanted Marty Friedman to have that Elvis scarf when she passed away.
Right.
You know, did he ever get that? I never heard after that, after the book.
No, So, it's funny, and you can go on. So, Scotty Moore, who is the guitar player for Elvis, he's got a great website, and he's since passed. But he's got a great website, and in there, there's one of his shows that he played at the Veterans Coliseum, the Veterans Memorial Auditorium, I guess it's called, in Des Moines, Iowa. And there's a picture. This is probably in the 50s, right? It's a pretty small gig, right? And my mom was there. My mom was at that gig, and that's where she got the scarf from Elvis, right?
Nice.
And he said, my mom said, he said, next time I come back here, I'm going to pack this place. And he did, when he came back a few years later, he was a big star. But that scarf, I mean, who knows what that scarf even looked like? What does an Elvis scarf look like when you're 50 or in your 1950s, rather, when he was a young guy? It could have been an old lady's scarf. So I never did find it. And unfortunately, my mom had a stroke and she lived in a nursing home, and she would always make sure Marty gets that scarf. And I looked, me and my brother looked, we turned that house upside down, and I never, I mean, it wasn't a scarf that said Elvis on it, So who knows? Maybe it looked like a scarf my mom would have worn. I don't know what it was, but I never did find it. But I let Marty know, that it was intended for him.
Just remembering the stories of her support, and just talking how highly, how influential she was on you. Pretty much, I would consider her being the one that got you into rock music, and then you going down the rabbit hole like the rest of us with Maiden and Priest and etc.
Right.
One thing I was in awe of is Kerry King giving you respect. Kerry, he's come out, he doesn't like religion, that's fine, but the one story I always bring up, how music brings us together, was I was at a Slayer gig one time in PA, and this lady's doing some Catholic motto towards us, and of course the guys in the front are messing with her, singing the Slayer lyrics, Hail Satan, blah blah blah. But then that sparked a conversation, and it turned out it was me and my buddy were Christians. There was a couple of Muslims in the crowd, a couple of Catholics, Satanists here and there, but not the crazy like Hail Satan, more so the ideology. And it really brought music together. I was wondering, who are some of the stars that you looked up to? Not so much your coworkers and people that you're with, but people like back in the days, like, oh my God, if I could just meet him as a musician. Who have you had conversations with about religion and some advice someone gave you? I talked to Rudy Sarzo. Man, what an energy he has. I know Nickel McBrain as well, very, very conscious of the spiritual world. So who's somebody that you looked up to and you had a conversation and you know what, you kind of took away like, wow, I would have never thought that in a religious sense?
Well, Nico, he and I've had a few chats about it, because I think he kind of had his, just, I don't know if it was a conversion or if he just kind of started going to church on Sunday. And then one day, that's what happens with us famous guys. They're like, oh my God, the guy from Iron Maiden, the guy from Megadeth, hey, you want to play drums or bass? I assume that's how it happened with him, if he participated in that at all. And of course, Nico's a wonderful guy, sweet guy. And same with Rudy. Rudy's just a beautiful soul. And, someone who I, of course, my late teen years, as I was becoming a professional myself before I moved to LA, his bass lines in particular, like on the Ozzy Speak of the Devil live album. And then, because as I understand, Chuck Wright, I think, played bass on the first Quiet Riot record, Mental Health. But then, then Rudy stuff on the next Quiet Riot record, and he moved into Whitesnake and stuff. So, was always a big fan of his performing and his recordings and stuff. So, so to get to know these guys, as friends, and as family friends and things like that was always very cool. I understand Gene Simmons is quite the Old Testament theologian, and, which, God bless him. He knows that that's his world, so I've never talked to him about it, but, talked to him about a lot of other stuff over the years, but never that. So he's probably your go-to Old Testament guy.
That's my foray. I love the Old Testament, metal, violent God.
He's your guy. That's what I've heard anyway. Yeah. Who knew the God of Thunder would be the ultimate Old Testament theologian? But I hear he is.
Having read a lot of these books, especially Paul Stanley's that we bring up, Kiss, and a bunch of others, you always look for when that person has their moment. And for me, I see two moments in your life. where it's the ultimate validation. The first one was when Kiss, Gene and Paul presented you guys with Thrash Band of the Year. I believe that was 91, around that time frame.
I have it right here, actually. Yeah, yeah.
And then the other one is the Grammy for Megadeth, when
Yeah.
you guys finally
Yeah.
got your win. You know, in those moments, you get to bask in the glory, and you get to be like, wow, we really accomplished something great. But if you had to compare the two, which one do you feel was the bigger validation to you as a musician? Because when I think, you know, my heroes telling me I'm the best, you're over the moon. But then when you get the Academy to say you're the best, or you win the championship, you know, that is pretty much a sign to the world, like, you can't take this away. I'm part of the elite now.
You know, I watched the Grammys last night, and Harry Styles, I think, said it best. You know, he got his Grammy, and he goes, you know, people don't usually give me things like this, you know, and my heart kind of felt for the guy. You know, it's, you know, and us in the artist world, you know, we're, people see us for the hour on stage, and we're living the dream, of course, but you know, sometimes the 23 hours off the stage isn't that. And I know nothing about his life or anything else, but it spoke a lot of truth. You know, none of us, it might have been him that said it too, you know, none of us go into the studio going, we're going to make a Grammy award winning album. You just don't, you know, you just go in to tell your stories, you know, and to write your songs, and to, you know, do what you do. And, you know, then sometime later, hey, you know, Gene and Paul are going to give you guys an award, or, hey, you're up for a Grammy, you know, these things come, and those are nice little, you know, the little cherry on top, you know. But, you know, you don't set out for those things, you know. You know, I think probably for my career in Megadeth, you know, we were always sort of regarded as the cool underdog, which meant, you know, like in our genre, Metallica broke down the doors for all of us. You know, they did the impossible, man. You know, and because of that, the rest of us got to walk through. You know, Anthrax, Megadeth, Slayer, Testament, you know, so many of the rest of us, Overkill, Exodus. And, you know, so Metallica certainly got to have all the Grammys, you know what I mean? And deservedly so. I mean, they were the 800-pound gorilla, man. They did all the heavy lifting and broke those doors down. But the fact that we got to have our day in the sun was very cool too, you know. And it didn't come easy. I knew when Dave and I met and we started the group, I was like, you know, this is going to work. You know, it just feels like this is going to work. But this is not going to be an easy overnight thing, man. This is going to take every freaking ounce of everything we have, you know, to make this. I mean, we were homeless. We were freaking couch surfing. I mean, working jobs selling solar energy when we first met. I mean, you know, it was anything but the glorious life of rock stardom. You know, hamburger helper and, you know, macaroni and cheese, you know, was the menu. And, you know, so when the success started to come, you know, or as I should say, the numbers started to build, you know, that was a benchmark for success for sure on some level. But at some point, it's like, man, if you're not into this and you don't enjoy it and you can't, sometimes by the time we got to at the end of the day and we got to rehearsal and we're working on songs, those few hours we were in there, man, that's when the whole world just went away. You know, that's when it was just us and our songs, and nothing else around us mattered at all, you know? And so honestly, if you're not doing it for that feeling right there, in the hopes that one day you might win a Grammy, man, that's a long road. You know what I mean? So I think by the time, you know, and I think probably for us, the enjoyment of the Grammy was we didn't win it on album one, right? You know, we didn't get best new artist. You know, ours was 16 records into the band's career before we finally got one. Even the people at the Grammys were like, I went up to the Recording Academy in Santa Monica a few months after we won. I took my son Roman up there, and even they were going, "Thank God you guys finally won. It's about time." Like even they were like, "Finally, you guys got one." Like they were thrilled for us. Like, oh my God, what do we have to do for these guys? You know, so even they were thrilled. So. You know, they've had a few of those stories over the years where people are constantly nominated and then finally the win happens, you know. But so I think that one was a big one, for sure. And you know, and then, you know, like you say, to be, you know, validated by my heroes, by Gene and Paul, who I didn't know yet. And to, that was great. I mean, look, to be on tour with Alice Cooper, to be on tour with Iron Maiden, these are your heroes growing up, and now you're a professional contemporary with them. And not only are you playing for, in this case, their crowds to try to hopefully win some of them over to your music, there's a part of you're going, I wonder if those guys are watching us play over there on the side of the stage, and probably the funnest moment of that was, I grew up a Def Leppard fan for sure. I'd never met the guys, and I played with Ronnie Montrose. Jimmy DeGrasso had called me to come in and play bass for Ronnie, and our first couple gigs were playing with Def Leppard. And in Jacksonville at the arena there, Joe Elliott and Phil Collin came in to talk to Ronnie, and they were gushing on him like, "Oh my God, we're huge fans!" Like they got him on the bill because they were fans of him. And I'm standing there going, well, I'm certainly a fan of Ronnie, and I'm playing in his band, and I'm also a fan of Def Leppard. And, I was like, man, these guys are fucking right here. This is so cool. I grew up, listening to especially Joe on the On Through the Night record and High and Dry, So and then when we were playing, they're on the side of the stage, like just looking at us like kids, like little kids going, "Oh my God, there's our hero, Ronnie Montrose." So it was like these three generations of like, we're not worthy, Wayne's World moment, going on. So, those are fun moments, man. Again, those are just the unexpected gifts, that you get. And sometimes that is the award as well as the reward.
And another one, people that you might not know of, you got to play with KK Downing and Les Bink, reunited those guys from Priest.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Hellbound for Leather. Yeah, that is my album. You mentioned the struggle that you guys went through. You've overcome addiction. You've overcome difficult times. When you look back, it's hindsight's 2020, but I always had this, this overview reading your books that, you wouldn't see it at the time, but there is a God's protection in these moments, whether or not you broke your leg, but then you had the opportunity to see Mom before she passed away. The Mercedes incident, your ex-girlfriend who was a call girl, and then you have like, yo, I gotta get tested. What was a moment, excluding the Pennsylvania incident where you guys were driving the van and you almost crashed? What were some moments that you were going through it, you had really no way to say like, okay, I have a plan, I can get past this. You kind of had to take it on the chin. How did you get past those situations, not being religious or at least not strongly religious at the time? Like, how did you just handle it? It's like, yo, I'm on drugs. Hey, I got a cheating girlfriend, which, every guy or girl knows that's painful stuff right there.
Right.
Was it just the music and Dave's vision that carried you on, or was there a little bit more of you being like, no, I have to fight this?
It's great when you have a career or a creative impulse that sort of propels you forward. But at the end of the day, when you go to sleep, you kind of have to check things in with your own brain and your own sort of, intuition. And, there were several times where Megadeth almost ended. It finally ended once in 2002. And I think that was kind of the final reconciliation. When I was getting clean back in the late 80s into 1990, they told me, they said, "David, there's only one thing you got to change, and that's everything." And I was like, whoa, that's a tall order, right? And fortunately, some things changed right away. Some people were removed from my life that needed to go. And it allowed me to finally get clean. And, then there's some other things I was going, everything. That means like playing in Megadeth, our band, and then finally, through no doing of my own, that was removed in 2002. And, it's kind of faced like, okay, there was the last one, that's now pulled off the table. And it's sort of, that's that reconciliation of like, well, who am I, and, who am I if my identity is not being that guy? How am I going to pay my bills if I'm not doing that job? So I think that period through the 2000s was probably one of the biggest growth eras of my life, of my adult life. Because, and again, that's when I went to school. You know, I picked up that job with Peavy, which was super cool. And the funny thing is, it was all really productive. It was really fun. The growth of my life on every level, you know, just kind of spiritually, just growing up as a, you know, as a guy not in a rock band, you know, kind of hit me as like, you know, this whole thing about being in a rock band is like a great idea for like, you know, 15-year-old kid who wants to be Kiss. You know, now here I am, I'm like almost 40. Like, is this really the thing I should be doing at this age? You know, and so it's, you know, even because I had, you know, a young family at the time. So, you know, part of me is just kind of going, this kind of is a weird, how do I reconcile this, you know, in my own mind? So, you know, I think for a season it had to end. It had to change, you know, so that I could go explore. And that's kind of what I always say, you know, they told me when I was getting clean, you know, God, good orderly direction. You know, what's the next right thing to do? And you know, so, you know, and sometimes those things are just put upon us and go, well, you know, that's out of your life. Now you're taking this new road, you know, and to me, those are the things where I think we try to kind of, you know, kind of get our mind around that. Maybe it's through religion, maybe it's through meditation, maybe it's through whatever, you know, just to kind of like make some sense of it, you know. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, you've read my books, you kind of know my story of all that stuff. But yeah, I think when you go through it, and you know what, honestly, every rock star that I was a fan of that I've read their books, they've all gone through the same thing. And that's what I realized. I go, okay, we're all bands are the same. All, you know, there's a certain chemistry of like the same 4 or 5 types of personalities that make up a group, you know, and they you know, it's the VH1 behind the music thing, right? They start with nothing, they make it big, and then they crash and burn because they're on drugs or whatever happened. And then, you know, out of the smoldering ashes, they rise again and they lived happily ever after. Yay. You know, that's kind of the story, right? That's the sort of the Hollywood movie version of the story. And I've gotten to live that too, you know, big highs, low lows, crash and burn, come out the other side, land on your feet, start all over, you know, and, you know, I've done that a few times. So, I've just kind of come to believe that it's like, all right, I guess we're doing that again. All right, well, here we go, starting over again. And it's okay, you know. I think that that's kind of part of how life is supposed to be. You know, I don't think that there is just one straight path right up the mountain and hey, everything worked out great and it was a wonderful life. That's that nobody who's ever been successful has ever had that story that I've ever read or heard about.
And that ties beautifully. It was kind of foreshadowing with Dale, I believe it's Dale Steele of F5,
Mm-hmm.
when he told you like, "Hey man, I'm back in Megadeth," and he's like, "Hey, that's great. Just be prepared if you get gout or anything again." But I think that's more of a testament, especially with everything that's happened within the past year. You know, for a lot of people, especially Christians, you know, something goes wrong once, and they'll tell you at school, they'll tell you at seminary, they'll tell you at church, like you screw up, and that's the everybody else is just gonna come down on you, you hypocrite, this and that. But the general love and support all of your friends and the media have given you, you to me in my generation have been the only person to go through such a situation and still have your credibility, not to have people bashing you out loud. And I always fathom, like, you know, that's a testament to a person's character. But speaking back to when you were struggling, you know, there's a great story Paul Stanley had with Gene Simmons. These guys are just button heads. They're musical collaborators. They're good on stage, but they're not the same person, and it comes out. But when they were
Right.
auditioning, they were writing, Paul tells a story of how this guy was really giving it to Paul. He was like, "Hey man, you think you're bitching, you think you're good, blah blah blah," and Gene interjects and says, "Yeah, he is." And Paul took that to heart. I was wondering, especially during the early days of Megadeth, maybe with Dave, maybe with Greg, maybe with somebody else, but was there a time somebody really stuck their neck out for you and that kind of gave you like, you know what, they're right, and I really need to start putting myself out there, start being confident? You already mentioned how the early 2000s made you really step out on your own, but back then, was there anybody that defended you that you were like, you know what, that gave me a little bit more to keep going and being on my own 2 feet?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days with Megadeth, I mean, Greg for sure was like that. You know, Greg was always because he grew up. in the city of Jackson, right? Town of 3,000 people, right? And I grew up on a farm, very removed from stuff. But, my mindset was always, I gave everything for music and for rock and roll. I mean, it just, even today, I wake up and that's what I do, So, Greg for sure. And then, when I moved to LA, I didn't know the city, especially a city the size of LA. Dave did, he brought me and Greg in. And then once, we knew Greg wasn't going to work out, he helped me get hip and get cool and, get in the mix of stuff. So for sure, he was a big brother to me with that kind of stuff for sure. And, look, there's been a lot of other people along the way. The guy that helped me get my gig over at Petey, I knew him he worked at a company called St. Louis Music, and they had the Ampeg brand. And he had hired Uriah Heep keyboard player Ken Hensley to do his artist relations for him. So when I called him in 2002 and I said, "Hey, Tony, my the Megadeth thing has come to an end. Dave's, stepped out of the band." And he said, "Well, hang on, I might have something. I'm doing some stuff with PB, and kind of like how Ken was my Ampeg guy, you might very well be my PB guy." And so it's we already knew the model of how it worked, and it worked out great. It was really cool, and and I think during those years, so there's a lot of people like that who have come along and cut me slack. I mean, when I came back to Megadeth, my friend Brian McDonald, who worked for Jackson Guitars at the time, he was a big Megadeth fan. He'd always see me at NAMM shows, and he'd always look at me and go, "You still sell more basses for Jackson than any other artist. Just let me know when we can make that bass for you." I swear to God, the press release went out. It was on, I think, a Monday. And like 5 p.m. at 5:05, he texted me. He goes, "Can we make that bass now?" And he was right on the case for me. And, I've had a really great partnership with Jackson Guitars now over the last, dozen years. We've really done some cool stuff together. And so I've had a lot of people, who have really had my back and believed in me. And, I think the goal is, it's, I just read it the other day. It's better to give than receive. You know what I mean? So it's always about, helping other people and giving to them. Look, some of us get the gift. We all get a gift of somewhere. Mine is, through, one of them is, to be able to be famous. It's like, all right, what are you going to do with that? Are you just going to use it selfishly, or are you going to use it to help other people? And I like to think I've tried to do pretty good with investing that into other ventures and other things that would be beneficial to others as well. Even like with the label and the coffee company and that kind of stuff. Giving back to some other things and giving some other people some opportunities.
One thing people will never let go because it was so monumental was the Big Four. Even now I can only imagine what it was like while you guys were playing, and I still have the vivid images of watching it as a kid and you guys playing as the rain is coming down in Sophia and then all the other gigs. But, that's just one gig out of hundreds. I was wondering, since you're coming back to the New Jersey area, you have, family in laws because your wife is from New Jersey. PA is a pivotal spot, especially Philadelphia. Do you have any gigs you remember from the Philly or New Jersey where it was just special, that energy, the magic was there?
It's funny you say that. There's a bunch of them. We've played with F5, we went through and played the Starland Ballroom, right? In, I don't know, that was 2007 or something. So that's one. So it'd be great to be back there again around that area. And I remember we played in Red Bank. I think it was on the Countdown to Extinction tour. We played the Count Basie Theater, which was a very small venue on that tour. We played the Capitol Theater over at Philly a couple nights, I think. And then we played the Red Bank in Red Bank. And I remember Sebastian Bach came down and he brought his son, Paris, with him, who was really small at the time, and now I know Paris. In fact, Paris has actually played drums for me when I played at Musicians Institute. He's a grown man and he's a professional player. And then Sebastian was in the audience watching us because he was proud of his son, playing with me and everything. So it's funny, me and Sebastian, we just run into each other at these random places around the world. And he's one of the good dudes in rock and roll. So that's one of the gigs I remember, around there. And you know what's funny? There was a gig that we played on the Dystopia tour. We played at the Prudential Center in Newark. Ice T was there. Ice and his wife Coco were there. You know, he's been a family friend of Megadeth for a long time. And I remember it was a really good show. And I remember I was singing really good that night. In fact, I remember our manager said, "Man, you were like rocking." Like he even sang the part. I forgot what it was. It was some part in, I think, Poisonous Shadows, where I sang sort of the ghosting answer call stuff to Dave's lead. And I remember it was just effortless that night. And it sounded so good in that big hall because it's got a really high ceiling. So things really reverberated up. And so that one was a memorable one. I remember that. So those are a few from the area that I remember.
A lot of fans of my channel will know that that's the first time I got to see you guys on that tour in Philadelphia, the Electric Factory. I interviewed Mike Moore's Suicidal Tendencies. Of course, you guys go way back as well. You know, you've stated that Countdown is your favorite album, and for me, it has the strongest songs. It's my favorite as well. What was your favorite bass line that you came up with off that one?
You know, and I say favorite, I mean, it's the one that I probably have some of the fondest memories of, and I do like the songs, is this transitional period where we had done 4 thrash metal records, from Killing Is My Business up to Rust in Peace. And Countdown, I think one of the things I liked about it is that there was this big challenge in front of us that if we were going to survive as a band, we had to not just survive, we needed to thrive. Like we really needed to turn a corner and really step up our game. And we did. I think we brought it big on that record. So that's one of the things I like, but I also just enjoy the songs, I think they're really cool. Bass wise, it's funny, the stuff that I wrote musically, I wrote on guitar on Captive Honor and stuff for Architecture of Aggression, and even the kind of middle breakdown or toward the end, kind of before the final chorus on Ashes in Your Mouth, or some stuff that I brought in there. So bass wise, look, the Countdown to Extinction bass line is pretty cool. I think, it's iconic to the song, it's one of the things Chris Adler actually pointed that out when we were playing. We played a Knotfest down in Mexico City when he was still playing with us back in 2016, I guess. And, he said at that gig, he goes, "Man, it must be so cool to play bass in Megadeth." And I said, "It is, but I mean, why would you just say that of all things?" And he goes, "Man, these songs just have these iconic bass breaks, whether and of course, he would know because he sits behind and he would sort of watch, Dave and Kiko peel off the stage, and, he and I would be playing Dog Patrol and Poison Secure, but also these other, moments, beginning of Wake Up Dead, just these things that I guess maybe just got used to them over the years, so I didn't think about them so much, because instead of all of us playing solos, it's almost like we get to have our featured parts within the song. We didn't have to do your typical kind of arena rock thing of, okay, beer break, drummer's going to take a 5-minute solo, or go, guitar solo, just go out and, wank and shred and do all your stuff. It's our features were really kind of built into the songs, which in a, kind of anti-arena rock way, I think keeps the audience more engaged because, it's not the obligatory, beer break kind of thing. You're keeping everybody engaged to the composition, and within it, there's these featured parts. So I took note of that when he said that. I was like, yeah, you're right. It's, the way we created the music, had everyone was featured. Like we said in the beginning, lead drums, lead bass, lead guitar, lead vocals. Like everyone's gonna have a lead feature in the songs.
But he's not wrong. And as a musician, you live for that. You want to be the one creating the hook in the song. But when you're playing them over and over again, I can see where you would be like, "Oh, I forgot." It's like that.
Yeah.
Really, when somebody lives a life that you've led, you've gotten so much good advice. You've been told so many good things, but there's always that one piece of advice where it just stuck in your head for whatever reason. It could have been a random mark, like, yo, man, don't buy the tour bus, rent it, or it could have been something serious like Ted Aguilar wrote,
Mhm.
Just Live. Just off base, what is the best piece of advice that readily comes to mind that every now and
The
again it just
bass. Yeah.
pops into your mind and you're like, you know what, that's good advice. I should probably think about this for this situation or etc.
Funny, I was just driving this morning. I went down to go pick up some coffee for the tour coming up, right? And I heard on my uh, phone, I had a Journey song played randomly. It was populating through some playlists, and Stone in Love is at it. And I was listening to the bass parts and how tight it was with the drums. And I remember, I don't know that anybody told me this, but it kind of came to me that the bass needs to kind of sit right down inside of the kick drum, right? And my best teachers have been producers. I've probably gotten the best bass lessons from making records, whether it was Carrot Fay and Randy Burns in the beginning to Paul Lanny, Mike Klink, Max Norman, Dan Huff. I mean, these guys they elevated my game big time. And I remember I was listening to this song and I was going, unless you can kind of go, unless you can put that bass note dead on with the kick, all this other shreddy stuff, like, is useless, right? And I learned that when we were doing, our manager Jay Jones took me, Dave, and Gar in to do some demos up at with Hitman Studios over on Fairfax and Santa Monica and Hollywood. And then for a while we recorded, I remember at least one session up on Hollywood Boulevard. We'd go to midnight when the studio time was really cheap, right? And stay up all night and record. And that's why I started using the pick, because in order to really lock with the drums and to really be able to execute the riffs and play along with the intricacy of the guitar riffs, the pick just worked better. And part of it, it kind of seemed like I was playing guitar and bass, but I wasn't. I was really playing bass lines. These were specific bass lines. So part of that is how I just created my own sound and my own style. But producers, that hit me, and I guess that's probably why that hit me today when I heard that song. Is bass players need to be down inside the kick drum, and who first told me that? Now that I'm thinking about it, was my third grade band teacher. When I got my bass guitar at age 11, I brought it into him because he was a bass player in the Navy band. It was my Gibson EBO, and he was playing it, and he would kind of give me some little lessons. I think he was my choir teacher. He's a music teacher, and then I think he became a choir teacher or something. But he taught me. He goes, he's talking about the relationship between the bass and the drums, And so I remember getting that lesson when I first got my bass at age 11. And then so today I'm listening to it all these years back, and I realized, like, there it is. It's the bass inside that kick drum, man. And unless you can really play along to what the drummer's doing, and until you nail that fundamental, everything else is just useless. I mean, and probably another thing that I remember doing a rock and roll fantasy camp with a bunch of guys, and Elliot Easton from the Cars was on it. And I love Elliot. Those first several Cars records, he had these short, explosive solos, just like Neil Giraldo does with Pat Benatar, those early Pat Benatar records. Those are probably a couple of my two favorite guitar players from kind of the late 70s. And Elliot told me, I asked him, I said, what was it like working with Mutt Lange? Because he got to work with Roy Thomas Baker on a couple of those early Cars records, and then Mutt Lange came in and did at least a record or two with them. And he told me something. He said, man, Mutt got me right in. He said, Mutt tightened up my playing, and he got me right inside the hi-hat. And I was just like going, having worked with Dan Huff, because Mutt would hire Dan to work on the Shania Twain records, and Dan is just amazing. I was intimidated actually working with Dan because he's so friggin' good, right? And he goes, oh my God, Mutt, he's just relentless. He goes, dang, Dave, I just pick a spot on the wall and just play it over and over and over for him, because he was so demanding of what he wanted to hear, And I'm thinking, man, if he's putting Dan Huff through the ringer, no wonder Dan's putting me through the ringer when we're, making, cryptic writings and Risk. But I tell you what, those guys made me better players. They just, They just elevated my playing, my timing, my attack, everything about every note of how I played just became better. From the third grade music teacher all the way up to Dan Huff and everybody in between.
But man, playing from Montrose to Megadeth and all your friends, it's just truly a remarkable life that you've led, sir. Everybody, I'm telling you now, come check out Dave Ellefson and Jeff Young and the boys. They are coming to the Ardmore Music Hall March 7th and Sayersville, New Jersey, March 4th. The Kings of Thrash, the best of the West live, and they're also promoting the Best of the West live at the Whiskey Go-Go that's coming out in March, and now the Best of the West coffee that is out now as well. Man, I'm telling you guys, what a lovely interview, sir. Thank you so much for your time. You were spectacular.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And everybody else, don't forget, be smart, be mindful, and rock on. God bless everybody. And ciao.
Hey, everybody. David Ellefson here. I am hanging with John the Ninja Johnson. And check out Kings of Thrash. We are coming March 7th to the Ardmore Music Hall, performing Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good. It's so far, so good. So what? In their entirety. We will see you there. Bye.
Woo, baby, you listen to John the Ninja. Oh, your ears are about to go on a vacation. John the Ninja's got what you need.